Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pit Stop number 14. Today, Andy and I are going to talk about something that is really, let's call it real for me, and something that I've struggled with a lot, and probably one of the most nerve wracking topics that we're going to go into that I've gone into so far. And today, we're going to talk about body image and issues with body image, and specifically in men. But before we dive into it, how you doing, Andy?
I'm feeling great, man. You and I had a awesome, I would say like a little clearing before we got started, and that's exactly what I needed to get into this deep conversation with you, brother.
Amazing. Glad
Yeah,
glad that you're feeling clear on it. So
let's hear.
I guess yeah, my first thing here is, in your opinion, why do you think that body image issues aren't talked about, especially in men?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I resonate with this topic deeply as well. To kind of jump on board with you about how real this feels. And so to answer your question, I think that a lot of men don't like talking about their body image is because it's very vulnerable, it's very revealing, and no pun intended. When we speak about that stuff, we feel completely naked. And as we've spoken about before around the masculinity culture, when vulnerability is a part of the conversation, for a lot of guys, if they haven't done a lot of self-development, I think programming over years and years and years has been that vulnerability equals weakness, equals I'm less than. And so to have a vulnerable conversation about body image could feel like revealing a weakness, which is not something a lot of guys who are not fully aware like to get into. It's scary. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, no, resonate with that a ton. And
Hmm.
for me too, when I think about it, it seems to be one of those topics that we've almost been told men aren't allowed to have these issues,
Like,
right? Of like,
yeah.
no, like you're not allowed to be self-conscious about your body. You're not allowed to show weakness in that. Like that's not something that you worry about, right? Like
Yep.
it's not even a conversation, and
Yep.
that's one that I've really that's really kind of got me. And a really interesting kind of like almost light bulb moment for me was at one of the King of Hearts heart to heart that I went to. We were having a conversation, and body image came up, and these I think it was two girls, but anyways, a couple of girls that were part of the discussion, they shared and they went, I actually had no idea that men struggle with this, right? And like a genuine, genuine like surprise that like it hadn't even crossed their mind that this was something that men would struggle with. And that really kind of stuck with me and has stuck with me for a long time, and is why, and one of the pushing factors that wanted, pushed me to have this conversation.
Yeah, totally, man. And like, uh, I'm uh, I'm revisiting because I was at that heart to heart with you as well. And I actually remember, I don't remember which one it was, but I do remember that coming up. And the shock value was also big for me, mainly because you know I've struggled through it my almost my entire life ever since junior high, and I think what we're told, Jared, as a man is, okay, if you have it, deal with it. Like, just do something about it other than talking about it. If you wanna be big, work out. If you wanna lose weight, just work out. Like, solutions uh, are thrown at us before processing,
Yeah,
before going a bit deeper. And so, yeah, like we just don't create space to talk about it. And you multiply that over the millions of men across the globe over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 years. And of course women are going to be like, what? That's what you deal with that,
yeah.
right? So totally get what you're saying.
For sure. And so would you be okay just going into a little bit of your personal experiences with it, your struggles, how it's come up for you, some of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so my journey around my body image and self-consciousness around my body, really it began at a very young age. I actually remember a very specific event that happened back in grade 8, where, and when growing up as a kid, I was actually one of the leaner kids, pretty skinny dude, smaller waist. And so I remember this event. I was sitting in the cafeteria at school, grade 8, and one of my friends, I was standing up, and she came up behind me, and she pulled on my shirt uh, tight to reveal like my waist size or my torso size. And she was like, "Hey, look how skinny Andy is. Look, everybody." It was like straight up bullying, right? Like, I don't know what she got out of it. However, I remember that so clearly. And if a young kid remembers an event vividly, it means that it made some sort of a mark on us. And I remember coming back to school post that event, I would wear like 2 shirts. I would wear a pair of shorts under my pants to to not appear as skinny as I actually was. And so I remember, looking back at that event, basically what happened was I was through that event, and I don't want to point fingers at that girl, but what ended up happening, or at least how I translated it, was that I'm not able to be fully accepting of who I currently am and what I currently represent in a physical form. Like, that's not good. That's not good enough. You're not good enough that way. And so kind of bled through my entire life around needing to look a certain way. And so that bled in not just my waist size, but it bled into how my hair looks, how I dress, and basically just always constantly worrying about what other people think of me, always looking outside of myself for validation. And so, like, and it's interesting, like, even to remember a few moments where people did compliment me on a certain thing, maybe it's the way I dress or my physique or something, I get like a jolt of like energy. And for me, in my opinion, that's a sign that something outside of myself is filling a hole that's within myself. And what that means to me is that there needs to be some sort of unpacking there, maybe some sort of unlearning, some sort of growth in that area.
For sure. And just to clarify a little bit, when you said you would feel that jolt, when somebody would comment, was that like a validation? Like, was that a positive jolt? Was that like a negative jolt? Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Totally, yeah. I'll expand on that. Yeah, it was a positive jolt for sure. However, it was definitely a validation. It wasn't like a grounded, thank you, thanks for seeing that, or thanks for commenting on that. Like it didn't feel like a grounded appreciation. It felt more like oh, really? Oh, awesome, cool, great. Like
Yeah.
I'm worthy now, something like that.
I was gonna say, like, almost pulling worthiness from that comment of like, oh, now that it's been noticed, like I'm worthy, kind of thing.
Yeah, or sometimes I'm even thinking about and reflecting on it now too, or in some occasions in the past, people would give me a compliment and I wouldn't even believe it. I would deflect it, right? I would be like, no,
Yeah,
right? And I would never let anything fully land. And if it did land, it was filling a worthiness gap in me.
for
Yeah.
sure. No, and I resonate a ton with that. And I have always been more of the latter, right? Of like it just never landing and be like, well, no, 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 you're wrong, right? Like, oh, well, yeah, but also look at this that is not that's not perfect, or like, whatever it might be, deflecting that positive, compliment, and being like, well, no, let me show you how it's not true, right? Or just not letting it land at all and just almost like throwing it out of like, oh, they don't actually know what they're talking about. Uh,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
And I
Which
just
like
want,
puts a ceiling on connection at the end of the day too, right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you actually for sharing that story about when you're young. I didn't know that. And it actually it triggered, some memories in me. And it's very interesting where so many of these problems seem to start at such a young age, right?
It does.
And
Yeah.
I think that for myself, like, I think a lot of it came from being bullied, growing up. Of like, that was always one of the things where I was on the other side, right? It was always like, oh, you're fat or you're chubby or whatever it might be. Like, you have a gut, like, you know, comments like that. And for me, a specific one that I remember, um, it was, I knew that I was self-conscious about it, right? And so whenever we were in gym class, and I think this was also would have been junior high, probably grade 7 or 8 kind of thing. And whenever we'd get changed, I would always suck in my stomach, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, I have to make sure that I don't do it too much to make it obvious, but like I want to take some of it away.
Yeah.
And I did that for the entire year until one day somebody called me out on it, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you always suck in your stomach when you're getting changed," right? And that
Wow.
that fear, right, of like, "Oh no, I've been caught. Like they see me." And
Yeah.
like, "No, I don't," right? And fighting back on it. But yeah, like that really has stuck with me, right? Another one that I know that I would do is, it shows up in my posture. Of I
Mm.
was always self-conscious about my chest, right? About having like man boobs. And so what I started to do is roll my shoulders over and almost hunch over, right? So that you couldn't see, and my shirt would kind of fall into and cover the front side of my body. So you couldn't see, instead of having that good posture, shoulders back, it was curled over so that, it's like, oh, you can just see my shoulders. You can't actually see what's going on underneath.
Wow. Isn't that thank you so much for sharing those experiences, man. And like,
Yeah.
isn't it crazy that we would go to the lengths of manipulating ourselves physically and mentally and emotionally to try to fit in technically in someone else's box, right?
Yeah. No, it's crazy. And another big moment for me, and actually why I was super excited to have this conversation with you, was because
Yeah.
you were the first tangible person, that also shared that they had body image issues. And it was, I think, that maybe that first heart to heart I ever went to when I was scared shitless and like didn't want to talk to anybody, but it came up and you shared, that it was something you struggled with. And I went, what? First of all, I'm like, I see you and I'm like, you're a fit dude. Like how
Yeah.
can you struggle with that? Right? Like there's no way, like that doesn't make sense. And at the same time, going, once that had kind of, like settled a little bit, of like, oh, other people struggle with this too. Like I'm not alone. Right. And then a couple of the other guys that were there at that heart to heart were like, yeah, me too, and me too, and me too. And that feeling of acceptance and like, wow, okay, I'm not the only one, and then releasing some of that shame around it, of again going back to that, I shouldn't feel like this, right? Like this isn't something I should struggle with, I should get over this. And then being like, oh, like other people do too, like I'm not alone, allowed me to release some of that shame that I held around it.
Yeah, Jared, like, there's already so much weight to shaming ourselves secretly, like in our minds, right, without telling anybody. And that's just like a lot of extra weight on our shoulders to carry around. And something that we've always preached at the Kings of Hearts was that in order to heal, we need to heal together. And it takes one person to lead with vulnerability to then invite everybody else to follow suit. And then that's when like the healing really begins. It's through awareness. And I remember that day as well, where you and I connected on that together at the heart to heart. And I remember that, just quickly, I remember that the story that I shared. I think it happened that day where I was trying on a t-shirt at a clothing store,
Yeah.
and I was wearing a small, but the clothing associate said, she was like, no, you're actually an extra small, not a small. And that just triggered me. Like, I was like, what? I'm
Yeah.
a, you know what I mean? The ego comes in and was like, nope. When in actuality, she just, you know, her intention was like, I just want a shirt that looks and feels good for you.
Yeah.
But however, I personalized it because of a subconscious wounding around body image.
Yeah. No, and I remember that story as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you sharing opened my eyes to was that it looks different for everybody. And, you know, just because you think this is the way that it should be doesn't mean that that's how other people feel. And what I mean by that is, you know, like, because my problem was always like feeling overweight, I would look at skinny guys and go like, oh, they have it so good. Like, if I could just bulk all the time and eat whatever I want, and like my only worry was gaining weight, I'd be so happy, right?
Yeah.
And seeing that come from the other side, where it's like, well, no, actually some guys, like, that's their struggle, is that they want to get bigger, right? They don't want to, you know, be skinny, whatever that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, again, kind of just threw me for a loop and challenged my preconceived notion of what that means, right? And what, you know, you're supposed to look like, or what it means to struggle, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, it's all a matter of the lens we see things through. And our lens, AKA our perspective, is defined by our history and our experiences. So yeah, like I think it's actually so fascinating to have two different people on opposite ends, like comparing themselves with each other, but struggling uh, a lot of the time secretly without even knowing it. Like one guy's looking at the other guy, like, oh, I looked like him, and then he's looking at the same guy and said, oh man, I wish I looked like him.
Yeah,
And no one says anything. Both parties are feeling shame or comparing or seeking outside validation, and it goes unnoticed. You know, it's fascinating at one level, and it's hella concerning at another level, right?
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, for you, what are some of the things that have helped you overcome it? You know, like, whether there's specific like actions that you've taken, if just like general mindset shifts, like what have you done to help, um, you know, help move towards a more healthy relationship with it?
Yeah, totally. You know, first, many things. First thing that comes to mind is to acknowledge it, and I think that goes for a lot of things that we want to try to work on within ourselves. Whether it's an addiction, whether it's a body image, whether it's negative self-talk or whatnot. I'd say just to acknowledge it is the first step. To share it, uh, and even just sharing it and being like, hey, like finding a close friend or something, be like, hey, this is something that I'm currently experiencing right now. I don't necessarily need advice or solutions at the moment, but this is just something I'm going through. You know, I think that is a really good technique. And anytime we feel that come up, even if it's in like a very micro way, find some platform to share it. And I know sometimes I make that sound a lot easier than it actually is. However, if you have a close friend or you're part of some sort of community group, you know, lean on them for exactly just that, you know, a safe container to just acknowledge and share. That's the first thing for sure. Um, the other thing that has really helped me, and that it's only been prevalent for me in the last like 2-3 years, has been to get more in my body. And so a lot of the times the comparative mind or the negative self-talk creeps in is when I spend too much time in my head about it. And if we were to flip the script and spend more time in our bodies, we would actually feel a lot less critical about ourselves, specifically around body dysmorphia. And so when I say like spending more time in our bodies, it's doing breath work. It is feeling what our body needs instead of how our body looks, right? You know, I I've shared on many accounts what I've been going through with some close friends and men's group as well. And one of the most valuable pieces of feedback that I got was feel in instead of look out. Feel in instead of look out.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So looking out is like looking in a mirror all the time. Looking out is always looking at another guy who has a body, like a physical body that you desire or you think you should have. Looking out is looking out for validation, looking for fishing for compliments to make yourself feel better. You know, like that's looking out, right? Feeling in means like, you know, do I feel strong? Feeling in also means like going through a little checklist about your health and your wellness and be like, do I take care of my body every single day, whether it's something big or small, regardless of how it currently looks, right? And so I think there's a difference between like feeling what our body should look like versus feeling what our body is at currently. And so feel in instead of look out, or feel in more than look out. You know, it's not always black and white, right? And so I began to dance with that feedback and really started to just like gently catch myself in moments. And yeah, like also looking out is like looking at the number on a scale, right? Like that is like, and then getting consumed by it, right? So yeah, it's like it's going in more than looking out.
Love that. Love that time. Yeah. And I guess just to share for me, like some of the things that have helped. And I think the biggest one is, and I've talked about this a little bit, you know, on past episodes, but self-compassion has been so huge for me, right? This last year, we're just leaning into it, of really even just switching that, you know, self-talk of it's okay, right? Instead of just absolute like negative statements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, and like hopeless statements, I would say, of like, you know, you'll never be fit, you'll never be, you know, skinny, you'll never, whatever it is, or like you are chubby, or, you know, your chest is not great, whatever it is, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah.
as silly as they sound, saying them out loud right now, of being like, you know, that's actually what's rattling in my brain. But switching it to like, you're not where you're right now, you're not where you want to be, and that's okay.
Mm.
Right? Or you're working on this. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost that small switch was the first step to allow myself that self-compassion to actually accept it, right? Because I think a lot of times it's hard to just, you know, tell somebody to go, well, now you just need to be positive, right? Like, just love yourself, like, accept yourself fully. Like, all right, I haven't done that for 20 years. Like, I can't really just all of a sudden decide that's how it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that approach.
Yeah.
Of just like acceptance.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And even going to that more neutral, right? Of getting out of the negative self-talk to almost neutral self-talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other big one for me was a really interesting tool, because I was so comparative, right? And still am. However, I have a much better relationship with it now. And when I say comparative, what I mean is, like, for example, at the gym,
Mm.
right? Of like looking at every single person and saying, oh, like, he's stronger than me, oh, he's fitter than me, oh, like, you know, he can bench more, oh, like, you know, um like weird, like, he's so flexible, I wish I was flexible, right?
Yeah.
And that would be me. And if I saw anyone that didn't, you know, hit those notes of making me feel worse about myself, I would ignore them.
Wow.
right? Is just like, okay, like I'm stronger than that person. Don't even look at them. Look at the person who's, the biggest guy in the gym,
Yeah.
right? And so what helped for me, and I think especially because I'm so analytical in everything I do, and it's something that my therapist brought up to me, but is actually just taking a look at the whole picture, right?
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like looking at a man and being like, okay, well, yeah, sure, like, he can curl a whole bunch, but I can, like I'm stronger than him. Okay, all right, like yeah, and it still satisfied that like almost need to see something negative in myself, but
Mm.
also it trained myself with like, oh, or like, yeah, again, it's like how silly it sounds saying these out loud right now. I'm almost laughing at myself,
Totally, man. Yeah, yeah.
right? But it's like, like, oh, like, he has a great chest, but like my shoulders are better than him, right? And so it's like all of a sudden it was just like, oh, like, I'm not perfect, and that's okay, right?
Mm.
Of, you know, some some people are gonna be better, quote unquote better than me at certain things, and I'm gonna be better at certain things than them, right? And it was almost that just like understanding of like, oh, it's not that absolute, I'm shit, they're better.
Yeah.
So that really helped me. And then yeah, and then that whole like looking outwards really stuck with me of like looking at the scale or
Yeah.
like seeing what I want to be or whatever it might be, and actually just looking at myself and being accepting of it.
Yeah. Like another, like for people that are listening to this right now and are currently experiencing a lot of quote unquote looking out, you know, if you're catching yourself in the moment looking out a lot, here's a little challenge, that, or call it a technique, but I would say this is a little bit of a extra step if you want to go this far, is always complete things with gratitude in some sort of way. And so if you're looking out and you see somebody at the gym and you're like, oh, like, whoa, like this guy he looks good, like I wish I was there, go up to him and compliment him, you know
Saying, okay,
like, hey, like, yo, I just want to let you know that and it's gonna be uncomfortable, right? But you look great, man. Yeah, you have a great physique, and I appreciate the hard work. It looks like you put a lot of hard work, and I appreciate the hard work that you put into your body. And like just rounding things out with a little bit of gratitude wherever possible. It is a healing process. That really does help because it cuts that cord of turning it back around on ourselves and being like, you're not good enough, because you just rounded that out, right? With some gratitude, and they might even open up a conversation around like, yo, like, what did you do to get up to this point? What's like, who knows, right? And you bridge that. Now all of a sudden we're bridging an insecurity with connection of some sorts.
I love that. That's so cool, and such a cool strategy that I don't think a lot of people would think of.
Yeah, well, whenever we're triggered emotionally and we just stay in our head, a lot of the time we just turn that back around, and we empty the gun on ourselves, right? We
Yeah,
shoot ourselves in the foot, not 9.9 times out of 10, whether we realize it or not. So, and it's going to require some practice, some awareness for sure. But yeah, like love, as our mutual friend Nuke says, like love, truth, positivity, right? How
yeah,
can we bring those three values into our communication? Yeah.
love that. So the next thing here is actually a really interesting realization that I went through, and I'd love
Yeah.
to hear just your thoughts on it, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, one thing I always struggled with, and it would almost piss me off, would be my reaction, would be when I saw people that I, thought quote unquote were super fit or like, desirable or whatever it might be, men and women, right? Of, um, they're, however I define that. And when they would open up about struggling with body images, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, like I said, I would almost get mad, You're like, fuck that. Like, you're not allowed to. Right? Of like
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
at them and being like, either like, you know, I find you super attractive, or like, you have the body that I want, like, whatever it might be. And
Yeah.
then hearing that they struggle with it, it didn't make sense in my mind. Right. And I would just say, like, no, like that can't be right. Of like, if you look like that, then you can't have those issues.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me for years and years, until I finally came to the realization of, in my opinion at least, body image actually has nothing to do what you look like on the outside. And it's
Hmm.
all about how you perceive yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of those people, seem to struggle with it,
Yeah.
because they're so worried about it, and that's why they work so hard,
Hmm.
right? And when it really kind of sunk in was for me. So I've gone through, I'd say, two fairly substantial like weight losses in my life, right? The
Yeah.
first one was about 7 years ago, and I dropped 50 pounds, right?
Hmm.
And the last one was actually just right now. Like, I just weighed myself, which I've gotten away from doing, because it, trying to stop that looking outward. But yeah, over the last 8-ish months, I'm down 40 pounds, right?
Yeah.
And the weird thing is that I don't see myself any differently. And in both times that it's happened,
Mm.
I've my preconceived notions of what I look like or what I am hasn't changed, even with that drastic of a weight change,
Yes.
which is really, just kind of, it's sunk in of, that whole, it's how you actually see yourself and not what you look like on the outside.
Yeah. I love that because it reinforces, a belief that I have around, if we keep on chasing something outside of ourselves, we're gonna eat our own tail. It's like a snake eating its tail, right? It's a very similar analogy to money. It's like if you chase money and to make X amount, and that is tied in with your self-worth. When you do make that amount, you'll still feel the same. You'll always just want more or something. And so I love that awareness that you have, because it really does kind of like, it's like hammer on the nail around the importance of doing our inner work and and thanking ourselves and acknowledging ourselves along the way, regardless of the outcome. You know, and again, it goes back to something I said earlier. It's like to be more in our body and to feel in it matters so much while we are navigating the self-consciousness around body image. Yeah.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, man.
Um, one of the other ones, which is another one of those stumped moments, right? Where it's you know what you have lived your life believing all of a sudden is challenged, and you don't have a reason. You don't have you can't work it out in your brain because it just doesn't make sense anymore, right? And
No.
a big one for me was always the story that I told myself was that if I was fitter, girls would like me more, right? And like this is what girls like. And so for me, that's lean and muscly, right?
Yep.
And in my brain, it's like that's what you have to look like. And
Yeah.
a couple times, talking to some of my friends that are girls, and they being like, "Oh yeah, I don't like that," and be
Yeah.
like, "Well, what do you mean? No, like, that's what. No, that's like that is
That's what you
what is
like.
posted." Yeah, yeah,
Don't mess up my perception right now. That's what you like, okay? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And that whole like, there's no way around it. It just like it just challenges everything that you've told yourself, and then it's just this weird feeling of like, well, am I wrong? And like, well, I can't do that. I've dedicated my life to this, like this belief, right? And so, um, yeah, just I'm curious if you've had any experiences like that, or just any comments on, on that of, just again those stories that we tell ourselves of like this is what other people want,
Yeah.
how that can lead us astray, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just comment on it. I don't have any like specific stories or experiences that I have, but they're just not coming to mind at the moment. But I can comment on it. I think it's funny, you know. Like I think that it's one of those things in our lives that we gotta insert a little bit of humor too. Is like laughing at ourselves a little bit, but like, oh, there we go again, Andy. Like, you know, like pushing, like resisting, like what actually is, and projecting our own shit onto it and making it about ourselves all the time, because that's what it is essentially.
Yeah.
Is when someone says something that doesn't fit a narrative that we've believed for 10, 20 years, we project onto them and tell them that they're wrong. We judge them and say that you're wrong for thinking or feeling that way, right? And so, one thing that's coming through me right now about that is let's just stop making it about ourselves all the time. And it's in those moments where we're invited to zoom out and look at the big picture. I always say, as we're traversing through self-development and growth, there's micro moments, or there's micro things, and then there's macro moments and macro viewpoints. And it's in those moments that we're just talking about that we need a macro a little bit. We need to zoom out and look at the big picture and be like, wow, that person said that they're going through body dysmorphia, but they have the ideal body that I have. A macro would be like, wow, like I didn't realize that so many other people go through it as well as me. What's the lesson here? Right? Or what's the unlearning to learn that I need to reflect on here? That's a macro, right? But a micro would be like, fuck you, like stop like thinking about that, or stop saying that. That's not true. Like you look so good, but those words don't land with them, and it's the same thing, the opposite. So we would be feeding into each other's wounding and unconsciousness if we don't zoom out. So it's not that micro is good or bad, or macro is good or bad. We gotta begin to learn when do we need to be macro in what situation, and when is it good to be micro in certain situations.
For sure. Yeah, super
important.
important.
That's a great point though, man. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'm curious too, because you've said the term body dysmorphia a couple times, right? And yeah. What does that mean to you? And the reason I ask is, I always in my head, like went to this, hyperbole version of it. It's like, this, let's call it like a, bodybuilder thinks that they're a 300-pound, like obese man. Right. And for the longest time, that's what I thought it was. Now, now that's probably not realistic. Right. And it's a lot of a bigger term, that's something that I've been just kind of quietly like thinking about, of like what it actually means. And so I just wanted to get your take on it.
I'm sure there's like a scientific, aka accurate definition of it. But for me, what it means, like how it feels true for me, is body dysmorphia means that your mind and your spirit is disconnected from your body. So that would mean, like, if you look in the mirror, you see something completely different than what you actually are, and you make yourself wrong for it. Yeah, that to me is body dysmorphia.
I like that. Yeah. And I think that's why I struggle with it, is because I go, well, how do I know if what I think I'm seeing is real or not? Right. And I think that's where the struggle comes in. It's like, well, like this is what I see, but how do I know, like, if that's my mind twisting it, or if that's actually the reality? And I think that's why it's been one of those things. I look at it, and I have removed a lot of the judgment from it, of just, like more curiosity now, as opposed to judging as it has been in the past. But yeah, so just something curious for me.
Yeah, I love that. And, one thing that something that you can try, and, it's something that I should do, that I would like to do more of, is to wake up in the morning, and as a part of my morning ritual, just without looking in the mirror, just looking down at my body and like, I'm doing it right now actually, but like hitting my thighs, just like, or on my body or my chest, and just like, thank you chest, thank you legs for the function, of it. Thank you shoulders, thank you knees, thank you feet, thank you stomach, right? Like just brings a lot of gratitude to what it currently is and how it currently serves us. We forget about that. We get too wrapped up in how it should look. We forget about its functionality, right? Like our legs, like my legs keep me walking. It
Yeah.
keeps me upright. It allows me to explore and adventure the world in an easier fashion, right? Like, not that you need legs to explore the world for people that have experienced, had to amputate a leg or something, right? Or who are paralyzed. However, with what we do currently still have, appreciate it, appreciate it, especially because we're all getting older, and and our body is always changing. I think here's a macro, a narrative that I've adopted is our body is always changing. And so if we continue to feel in instead of always look out, we get to dance and navigate with the changing body. And you said the word curiosity. From a place of curiosity, we can ask ourselves every single day, like, hey body, what are you feeling today, and what do you want to get up to? Like looking at your body like an ally and as a friend, instead of someone you shame or something you shame, because we wouldn't outrightly, at least you and I know this because, I know who I am and I know you pretty well, is that we would never look at a friend and shame our friend for the way they look. So why would we do that to ourselves?
Yeah.
Why would we do that to ourselves? And maybe that's just like, that question isn't meant to further shame. I think that question is just meant to inquire deeper.
Yeah. And that,
Yeah.
that reminds me a lot of, the same idea in that self-talk conversation, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like, you wouldn't talk to your friend or a stranger like you talk to yourself a lot of times, like those are things you would never say to somebody else. So why do you say them to yourself? Right. And, again, just questioning that of like, what, like, do I deserve the same compassion that I show other people? Well, yeah, right. Probably a little bit more even. And so just questioning of like, well, then why don't I show that to myself? Right. Yeah, no, I love that. And the final thing that I wanted to ask is, how do you feel that we normalize this conversation more? How does this become, a topic that isn't taboo or, is at least even talked about, kind of what we hinted at the beginning here.
Yeah. Well, I would say this podcast episode needs to continue. Like, I feel like the conversation, like on a public platform, especially, should never end, or especially around this topic. And so, to do a part 2 on this and maybe bring a third person on to get different stories and perspectives, and then sharing these thoughts, these reflections and these words out to the world is going to make it less taboo, right? The second thing is, the next time, for whoever's listening, the next time you have a conversation with, because we're speaking specifically to men, right? So, the next time, so if you're listening and you're a man or a woman, the next time you have a conversation with a male friend or a family member of yours, just ask them. Just be like, hey, have you ever dealt with body image insecurities? Because I have, or something like that. And let the conversation be light. You don't have to get so deep into it, but to begin the conversation is going to, in the long term, I believe, eliminate that taboo, right? Like, you know this, like if we do something enough, even if it's uncomfortable, it will then feel comfortable. If you do it enough, if you
Yeah.
lean into it, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is not to go out there and just blast these conversations out, you know, 5, 6 times a day. But I would say that whenever it's feeling really alive for you around body image, body dysmorphia, or insecurities around the physical body, in those moments, start a conversation. In those moments, start a conversation. Don't let it fester. Don't let it fester.
I love that. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
like when you're talking there, it really brought up for me, something that I believe a ton in, of to make real change, if each person does one action that leads to real change, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like you have to go blast it, it's not that you have to bring it up with every single person that you meet, but if you can go and create a safe space or a safe container to have a conversation with one person that around, body image, around depression, around mental health, whatever it is, that does lead to change, right? Because, that can inspire that person to do the same for someone else, right? If everybody does it for one person, that's actually a huge change.
Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing that really, really resonates with me still is, something we talked about at the beginning of just changing the conversation of like what a man is supposed to look like or should do, or the issues that they should struggle with, and what real strength looks like, right?
Mm.
Because I really do believe that real strength is being able to admit these things and still accept yourself for it, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to pretending that nothing's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Like that's the piece around vulnerability as a man. It's like you actually strengthen emotionally, the the more you speak your truth, however that looks and feels like to you. And so, you know, I think we're going into a time now where, we're moving away from the patriarchal, you know, call it framework, and challenging it, rightfully so. And with that comes really tough conversations, uh, vulnerable conversations. And so this everything that's happening in the world right now, everything that's happening within ourselves around our inner talk, like it's all an invitation to grow and to heal together.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Any, parting shots, anything that you wanted to say here before we jump off?
You know what? I'm going to ask you a question,
Yeah.
and I'll answer it too. We can keep it as call it a neutral affirmation.
Okay.
Okay. What's a neutral affirmation that you can tell your body right now?
I would say, you're getting healthier.
Yeah.
Because it's been interesting where, very recently, like, in the gym, just with my fitness, I've really been focusing on the things that I have ignored for a very long time. And that's things like, rolling out and working on flexibility, and, making sure I'm engaging proper muscles, which is a super, scientific kind of answer to it. However, it kind of goes into the overarching um, thesis that, I'm doing this to make myself healthier, and looking better, is a nice benefit.
It's a byproduct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I love that. You kind of stole mine, so I'm going to think of a different one. I would say to my body, a neutral affirmation would be, we live in a world that is already hard on our physical body. Like physically, we're already hard on our bodies with some of the poor habits that we maybe have adopted, and we're also very hard on ourselves emotionally, on our bodies secretly, as we've been talking about the last hour. And so I would say, through both of those those things, you still show up every single day. And you're still healthy and you're still strong and you're showing up every single day. Keep showing up.
Love that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, thanks so much for doing this.
I love that conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was tough, but it was therapeutic, I think. And I think it's an important one to have. So.
Yeah, man. Thank you for always setting up the space for these deeper dives, and don't stop doing what you're doing with your podcast and with these episodes. And yeah, I love it. I'm actually so excited to share this across the board after it's launched. So
awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you. Love you tons, and we'll chat soon. Okay.
Absolutely. Take care.
Yeah. Bye.